Hi guys. So today I wanted to talk about unmasking, like masking. Of course, that's just the opposite process. But I've talked before about how I think like masking can have very serious negative aspects, such as like basically hiding things you need help with, and it's almost like an extreme extension of when I talked about like British culture with like the whole stiff upper lip, like of just kind of keeping things to yourself and kind of giving off a false sense of like being okay and stuff, right? And yeah, just not really being your authentic self. So yeah, though that's sort of like a really negative way to look at masking. But what I haven't talked about too much before is the dangers or the difficulties of not masking, especially as an adult, but also as a child. So the first thing I want to kind of explore with you guys is the reason why I kind of started masking in the first place. So I started masking from a very, very young age because it was like literally like as a toddler, around the time I got diagnosed, really. It was kind of pointed out to me that I would like behave in ways that were like just not normal. Like I would like do like lots of like stimming like with my hands and stuff, and I don't know, I mean maybe even the tired kid making silly noises. I don't think I did that much, but just stuff like that. It was kind of like from a young age, like I was kind of like became aware that there were things I was doing that wasn't normal and made me stand out like a sore thumb, basically. And so I kind of tried to stop doing them out of shame and fear of social exclusion. And of course, what I didn't realise at the time was that, even if you try and mask, if you're not perfect at it, or if people remember when you didn't mask perfectly, then you'll get excluded anyway, right? And so, yeah, and it wasn't like, 5-year-old me, like, instantly realised, like, oh, wait, this is, these are all the things I'm doing that, make me uncanny, and so I'm going to stop doing all these things right now. It's kind of over time, like I've kind of realised, the things that made me look weird, like even, to the point of like, special interests and stuff, like in my later childhood and early adolescence, like I really tried to hide special interests because, people like, other kids at school and stuff would say, they just, you know what it's like, right? If you're autistic, you've almost certainly been the subject of at least emotional bullying, like I was. So yeah, that's kind of why I tried to mask from a young age, and with very limited success. It's like if you're kind of my level of autism, you can kind of like fool people a little bit, but because it's like I do have like I know people will kind of try and be polite and stuff and say that I don't have an Aspie way, like an autistic way of speaking, but like I know I do. I know like my voice is kind of a little bit off, and my vocabulary is a little different, and all those things, like they're not necessarily going to be like everyone's going to be like, oh, that guy's definitely autistic, but they're going to be like, wow, that guy's got a bit of a lisp, or maybe he was brought up in a really posh, educated family, and that's why he uses all these big words, So it does have an effect on people's opinion of you, even if it's not like, even if it's not unmistakably autistic, like obviously autistic. But yeah, that's very difficult to kind of overcome. But yeah, the main thing I want to talk about today is actually the dangers of not masking. So one aspect of like masking, at least for me, and I think for a lot of other autistic people, is kind of like just trying to regulate our emotions as much as possible. And so, you don't have to be a genius to realize that like not having any like emotional regulation can, lead to catastrophic, disastrous consequences, such as, having a meltdown in public is, when you're a kid and you have a meltdown, it's like, you're kind of like having a tantrum, like, like yelling, kind of like, punching yourself, like, that's what I did when I was a kid. I would punch myself. It was like a meltdown, as part of the meltdown. But, it's like, yeah, people might be like, oh, that kid's being annoying or being silly or hope he's okay, and your parents might like, restrain you or tell you off or something. But, apart from that, it wouldn't really be that consequential. But of course, if you're an adult, especially if you're like a guy and then like a tall guy as an adult, and you acting like that can get you arrested. And not just like acting like in a meltdown kind of like emotional dysregulation way, but also like, I've heard of like people who are like obsessed with trains, and they've kind of like gone on a train, and or they've just kind of like hung around like a train station a lot to look at trains, and they've been arrested for like cited for like loitering or trespassing or whatever, right? And so it's not just like the obvious behavioral issues of masking that can lead to like serious like consequences, so you have to be careful. It's like, and also it's not even about like necessarily like breaking a specific law, but you can come across as just being really weird, and at least for me, like I do care a little bit at least about like people like thinking I'm weird. Like God forbid someone like in public called me weird, right? That would be devastating, and just kind of gives me a traumatic flashback to being the kid excluded in class. So the kid who didn't have any friends or whatever. So I do kind of I generally am very high in inhibition, unless I'm like drunk or something, and even then I'm more high inhibition than other people who would be comparably drunk to me in public. And so and yeah, it's not it's not nice to be seen as the weird guy. Like you see on like auditors, right? If they like do a documentary and they see they see someone like on the street who's like acting a bit strange, like everyone is, well, because they're invoking the uncanny valley, to be honest. Like everyone is like, ooh, you're weird, like, ooh, like they're almost waiting for an excuse to like, I don't know, like beat you up or whatever because you're acting weird, or, people just don't respect you, basically, if you act too weird, even if you're not doing anything specifically illegal. But there are also other aspects to like why not masking can be dangerous. And one thing that I've noticed is like if you're like me and you've grown up like trying to mask, at least for me, like being in environments where you feel like you have to mask to survive. And I guess this can also be true to a lesser extent for like more neurotypical people. Like if they say grew up in a really abusive household where they were forced to act a certain way, or they'd be threatened with violence or whatever, and then they kind of decide to go against that at some point, that can be very difficult. But for me, like, and I don't know if this is true for other people, but like if you kind of like get to, that sort of quarter life crisis, at least, this is what happened to me, where you're kind of just like, this whole like trying to mask and stuff and try to like, be normal and stuff just ain't working out. Then, you try and like, okay, I've just got to like put the mask down because it's killing me inside. Because that's the thing, like, I know this is more for the pro-masking or an anti-masking video, but, like, it does kill you inside. Like, when I try and put on a performance, of, like, following a social script, it really does feel weird. And especially if I'm, like, trying to be happier than I am, that for some reason, it just feels awful, and, I don't like to do that. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, like, if you kind of suddenly kind of let yourself go for, I think that's pretty good metaphor to describe it. Like, you let yourself go, right? You let the mask down a bit, and you stop kind of sticking by, like, all these strict behavioural demands and stuff a little bit, and you try and just, like, not necessarily, like, being an asshole or whatever, but just, like, trying to, act a little bit less normal, pursue your special interests a little bit more, maybe try to, skip some of the really taxing social norms, and, like, not making eye contact as much, not kind of just using a typical conversation script, just, like, for me, just, like, being more quiet, or talking about what you want to a little bit more rather than what neurotypical society wants you to talk about. Or, another thing is just, like, not kind of, and I know this sounds like almost kind of like a postmodern thing to say, but, like, not giving as much emotional labour to other people, and, realize, and, like, kind of, like, taking back control of that, and, like, asserting that, if you are going to socialise with someone, like, you don't it's not, like, morally obligatory to socialise someone, to smile at someone. If you do that, you can do that if you feel like it, or if you want to be nice to that person. But, it's up to you at the end of the day. And kind of, if you go down that way of thinking, and you kind of, like, take back control of those aspects of your life by, masking less or whatever, lots of people in your life will probably not like that, because they're used to the masked version of you. And something that, I've kind of experienced as well is, like, people just, like, you kind of feel that people are very disappointed in you because you're not keeping up that facade. Because, a mask is a facade, right? Like, that's pretty much the same concept, right? And people say, oh, you're putting up a facade when you're, masking in a neurotypical sense. And people get very disappointed because kind of realize, like, at least for me, it's like, I'm not quite as confident and independent and stuff like that as maybe a lot of my family thought. It's kind of getting to a point in, like, my late teens, very early 20s, where they're like, all right, we're ready to treat us like an adult now, so here are all these responsibilities and stuff. And then, as my mental health kind of declined in my early 20s, especially, like, in 2020, and 2021 as well, I guess, they kind of realised that, I'm not like as developmentally, I'm not as developmentally advanced as they thought, and I'm, compared to my peers of similar age, I'm behind developmentally and in terms of independence. And so, I think, when people in your life, most of the people in my life are really just family, so, I'm kind of basing it off of that. But, that can be very difficult. So, and it just kind of feels like, I think people can just get very confused, because they're like, oh, a few years ago, you could, like, do this thing, you could handle this thing, so what's going on? Are you just making an excuse because you don't want to do it? And it's like, if, like, say there was a social event that you would go to, and, you would mask and stuff, right? And then you're just like, nah, screw this. I don't want to go. It's not good for my mental health having to mask and stuff, and it just makes me feel uncomfortable. And I just didn't say before, like they're almost kind of right in the sense that like, yeah, you don't want to go, right? And that's why you're not going. But that's also like valid that you don't want to go. But yeah, people still kind of can get upset about it. I'm thinking of like family events and stuff, right, that I don't like to go to. But, and it's almost like part of it is like, I kind of only recently realised that like, I don't actually have to, and so I won't, it's, yeah, it's kind of tough. And yeah, I think just in general, it's like, I know I'm not like severely disabled. I'm not like, Down syndrome in a wheelchair or anything, but like people around me kind of like realizing, like that I actually do have like some special needs in a way, nothing like too severe, but, like if at least, I do have some additional needs that most people don't have. And I think for a while, like my family kind of coped while growing up that like, oh, he's outgrown his diagnosis, oh, it just means that he's like, I remember like my dad once said to me, oh, well, really all it just means is like, you're really smart and sometimes you forget your coat. And it's like, yeah, that is really simplifying it, And yeah, it's a complex condition to have. And it comes with lots of comorbidities, and they kind of pop up, and as I've gone along through life, really. And so, yeah, I have issues with anxiety and depression that I didn't have when I was like maybe 10 years old. And then, it's difficult, So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had to say today. I just wanted to kind of warn you guys about the dangers of masking as an adult. And yeah, of course, a lot of what I've said does apply to, autistic children and stuff as well, but particularly, like large adult people, I mean like, tall or whatever, or just adult people in general, right? Because, yeah, society basically looks at your age as a number and kind of just, it has certain expectations, that like, at least approximately you should have done, like, you should be doing some of these things and some of these things, you should have done some of these things and so on, you see what I mean? And so, yeah, I think the main issue with, the main danger of masking is just, yeah, they come with age, really. And that kind of sucks because, I still, like, the fundamental autistic traits I have are still the same ones I had as a 5-year-old. But, there's very little understanding of autism in adults, and there needs to be more because, I know life expectancy for us is lower, but, most of us do become adults at some point, even as children. And, I think, people should just be more, I think, the neurotypical public should be more aware of, the what it's like to be an adult with autism. And, just to kind of be a little bit more understanding, I guess, more patient. And we should also be aware of the dangers, right? Because even though it's, it's not saying immoral to not mask, but you can get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. You can lose opportunities. You can just go through really negative emotional experiences under certain circumstances if you're not masking. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say today. Let me know if there's anything I missed from this topic that you want me to talk about. And, have a good day if you can, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.